She showed up at his gate with nothing but a dust-covered bow, and spoke like she already knew how it would end. The barn door slammed against the wind as flames licked up the wooden beams, snapping and hissing in the frozen dark. Wyatt dragged a bucket through half-ice water, breath burning in his chest, while she ran past him, bare hands, no hesitation, straight toward the fire like she'd done it before. The smoke stung sharp, but she didn't slow, and he didn't stop her. "Tell me, would you follow her into that fire?" The wind came down Red Hollow Valley like it had somewhere better to be. It carried dust low across the ground and rattled the loose boards on Wyatt Mercer's fence, the kind of sound a man stopped hearing after enough years alone. Wyatt stood with one boot braced against a leaning post, pulling a strand of wire tight with gloved hands gone stiff from the cold. The sky hung low and gray, and the cottonwoods along the creek had already turned, their leaves the dull yellow of coins long out of use. Winter wasn't here yet, but it was close enough to smell. He heard her before he saw her. Not a horse, not wheels, just the steady, uneven crunch of boots on dry earth. Wyatt straightened slow, turning his head toward the road that cut through the valley. Nobody came out this way without a reason, and nobody came on foot. She moved into view like she'd been walking for miles and hadn't once considered stopping. A woman, maybe late 20s, coat too thin for the wind, dark hair pulled back but coming loose around her face. Dust clung to the hem of her skirt, to the toes of her boots, to the lines of her hands where they gripped a worn cloth bag. She didn't slow down until she reached the fence. Didn't wave, didn't nod, didn't ask. She stopped 10 feet from the gate and looked at him like she was measuring something she hadn't decided to trust yet. Wyatt let the wire hang loose in his hand. The wind pushed between them, carrying the dry smell of dirt and something faintly sweet from the creek below. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said, quiet but steady, like the words had been carried a long way before they reached him. "My mother said you were a good man." It wasn't a greeting. It wasn't even a question. Just something placed between them, like a coin set down on a table. Wyatt watched her a second longer than most men might have. Her eyes didn't shift, didn't drop. Whatever had brought her out here had burned away the habit of looking away first. He rested his hand on the top rail of the fence, feeling the rough wood beneath his palm. "Did she now?" he said. The woman didn't answer. Her grip tightened slightly on the bag, knuckles pale against the worn fabric. The wind lifted a strand of hair across her cheek. She didn't brush it back. She stayed where she was, outside the gate. Like crossing it meant something she hadn't agreed to yet. Wyatt glanced once toward the road behind her. Empty. No wagon tracks fresh enough to matter. No rider waiting out of sight. Just her. He stepped away from the fence and walked to the gate, boots crunching soft in the dirt. The hinges creaked when he pulled it open, a tired sound that echoed farther than it should have in the quiet valley. He didn't ask her name, didn't ask where she'd come from, didn't ask why she'd walked. He just held the gate and looked at her. "Stay and find out." The words landed easier than they should have. She didn't move right away. Her eyes shifted past him, taking in the cabin set back from the fence. The small garden gone half to weeds, the tools stacked by the wall, the thin trail of smoke rising from the chimney. A place a man kept because there was no one else to keep it. She looked back at him. The wind pressed her coat closer to her frame, outlining how little it would do once the real cold came. Her breath came slow, controlled, like she'd learned not to waste it. Then she stepped forward. One foot. Then the other, crossing the line without ceremony. Wyatt stepped aside, letting her pass, close enough now to catch the faint scent of travel on her. Dust, cold air, and something else he couldn't place. She didn't thank him, didn't speak. Just walked through the gate and into the yard like she meant to stand there until the ground itself told her what came next. Wyatt closed the gate behind her. The latch clicked into place with a small, final sound. For the first time in a long while, the valley didn't feel quite as empty. He picked up the loose wire again, though his hands had stopped working it. Behind him, he heard the soft shift of her boots in the dirt. The faint rustle of cloth as she set her bag down near the porch. He didn't turn around. Not yet. Some things he'd learned didn't need to be rushed, and some things, once they arrived, changed more than a man expected. The wind moved through Red Hollow Valley the same as before. But it didn't sound the same. Not anymore. The wind still moved through Red Hollow the way it always had, brushing the dry grass low and slipping through the cracks in the cabin walls. But now there was another sound beneath it. Soft, measured, not quite belonging, but not leaving either. Wyatt kept his back turned longer than he needed to, gave her the space a stranger deserved. He bent, picked up the loose wire, and pulled it tight again. The metal bit into his glove, the post creaked, and the rhythm came back to his hands. Work first. Questions later. Or not at all. Behind him, he heard the porch step give a low groan under her weight, then quiet. Not restless, not pacing, just waiting. By the time he finished the line and coiled the extra wire at his belt, the light had started to fall. The kind of early dark that came before winter settled in for good. He walked up to the cabin without looking directly at her. She stood near the door, her bag set beside the post, her hands empty now. That seemed to matter, like she'd decided not to hold on to anything she didn't need. Wyatt opened the door and stepped inside, leaving it wide enough behind him. "If you're staying," he said, not turning around. "There's coffee on the stove." He set his gloves down on the table and poured from a dented tin pot into 2 cups without asking if she wanted one. The second cup sat there, steam rising, untouched. A moment later, he heard her step in. The door closed with a soft push. The latch didn't catch all the way. He let it be. She didn't move right to the table. He could feel her eyes on the room, taking it in piece by piece. The narrow cot by the far wall. The shelf of books, uneven but kept clean. The ledger lying open beside a stub of pencil worn down to the wood. The kind of place a man kept for use, not comfort. Her boots sounded heavier on the wooden floor than they had on the dirt outside. Slower, too, like every step was being measured before it was taken. She came to the table at last and sat without asking, pulled the cup closer, didn't drink right away. Wyatt took a seat across from her, leaned back slightly, and let the chair settle under his weight. "You got a name?" he asked. She looked at the cup, not at him. "Hannah." Nothing more. He nodded once. Didn't offer his in return. If she'd come looking, she already knew. She lifted the coffee, took a careful sip, and set it back down. Didn't flinch. Most folks did. Her eyes drifted almost by accident to the open ledger beside his elbow. Wyatt didn't close it. Didn't move his hand over it either. He just watched. Hannah leaned forward a fraction. Not enough to make it a point. Just enough to read a line, then another. Her fingers hovered above the page, then settled lightly on the edge. "You're short," she said. Wyatt raised an eyebrow. "On feed," she added, tapping once near the bottom of the column. 3 deliveries written, only 2 paid. He followed her finger. The numbers were there, same as they'd been all week. "You sure about that?" he said. "I am," She reached for the pencil, paused just long enough for him to stop her if he wanted. He didn't. She made a small mark beside the entry. Clean, precise, no hesitation. "You're carrying the wrong total forward," she said. "You'll feel it when the snow comes." Wyatt leaned in, just a little, looked at the figures again, then back at her. "You always go through other folks' books uninvited?" Hannah didn't look up. "Only when they leave them open." That sat between them for a second. Then Wyatt let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. He reached for the second cup and slid it closer to her, though she already had one. "Stay," he said, simple as that. No speech, no bargain spoken out loud. Hannah's eyes lifted just once, met his, held there longer than before. Then she nodded. That was all. The next morning came early and cold. Frost clung to the edges of the trough, and the bucket rope felt stiff in Wyatt's hands. He stepped out of the barn with a pail half full and stopped short. The yard looked different. Not cleaner. Not better. Just set in order. The tools by the fence leaned straight instead of scattered. The broken hinge on the chicken coop door had been tied tight with wire, neat and strong. Even the stack of kindling by the porch had been squared off, bark facing the same direction. Hannah stood by the well, sleeves rolled, drawing water like she'd done it there 100 times before. She didn't look at him, didn't wait for approval. Wyatt set the pail down slowly. "Didn't ask you to do that," he said. She tipped the bucket into the barrel, water sloshing against wood. "You didn't ask me to leave either." He watched her a second longer, then nodded once. That was enough. By evening, there were 2 plates on the table. No words about it. No mention of what they were to each other. Not husband and wife, not strangers either. Something in between, something quieter. Outside, the wind kept moving across Red Hollow Valley. Inside, the silence had changed shape, and neither of them tried to fix it. It held steady for a few days. Quiet mornings. Work done without asking. Supper taken at the same table, with the same 2 plates, the same pot of coffee set between them like it belonged there. Then the road brought trouble. Wyatt saw the buggy first. Too fine for Red Hollow. Wheels clean, horse well-fed, leather polished like it hadn't known a hard season. It didn't belong to the valley, and it didn't slow until it reached his gate. Hannah was at the well when it stopped. She didn't step back, didn't step forward. Just set the bucket down and waited. The man climbed out like the ground owed him something. Mid-50s, gray at the temples, coat cut from a city tailor's hand. He brushed a speck of dust from his sleeve before looking up. "Mr. Mercer," he said, voice easy, practiced. Wyatt leaned against the fence post, arms loose at his sides. "Depends who's asking." "Edwin Crow." The name sat there a second. It wasn't unknown. Crow's eyes shifted just once toward Hannah, not long enough to be called rude, not short enough to be polite. "You've made an addition," he said. Wyatt didn't follow the look. "Say what you came to say." Crow smiled like he'd expected that. "I've come about your land," he said. More precisely, the water running under it. Hannah's hand rested lightly on the edge of the well, still, listening. Wyatt pushed off the fence, stepped closer to the gate. "Not for sale." Crow didn't argue. Not yet. He reached into his coat, pulled out a folded paper, and held it between 2 fingers like it might settle things on its own. "You may find that changes," he said. "Territorial boards reviewing water claims along this stretch. Happens every few years. Paperwork gets complicated." The wind picked up, tugging at the edges of the page. Wyatt didn't take it. Crow let the paper fall back to his side, unbothered. "Winter takes more than land," he went on, voice low, almost friendly. It takes people. A man alone can weather that. A man with responsibilities tends to reconsider. That was when Wyatt's eyes moved, just slightly, toward Hannah. She hadn't changed her stance, but her gaze was fixed on Crow now. Not afraid, not welcoming, just measuring. "You finished?" Wyatt said. "For now." Crow tipped his hat, slow and deliberate. His eyes lingered one last second on Hannah, as if committing something to memory. Then he climbed back into the buggy and turned it around without hurry. The sound of the wheels faded down the road. The valley settled again, but not the same way. Wyatt stayed by the gate a while longer, watching nothing, thinking less than he should have. Behind him, the bucket rope creaked once as Hannah drew it up. "You know him," she said. It wasn't a question. Wyatt turned. "Know enough." She poured the water into the barrel, steady, careful not to spill. "He's lying," she said. Wyatt raised an eyebrow. "About the board." She didn't look at him, just set the bucket down and wiped her hands on her skirt. "He doesn't need a board to take what he wants," she added. That hung there. Wyatt stepped closer, slow, stopping just short of the well. "You got a reason to say that?" Hannah finally looked up. For a second, something moved behind her eyes. Not fear, something sharper, something held back. Then it was gone. "I've seen men like him," she said. Wyatt held her gaze a beat longer, then nodded once. "Yeah," he said. "So have I." That night, the wind came harder. It rattled the shutters and pushed smoke back down the chimney in brief, bitter bursts. Hannah sat at the table with a sheet of paper pulled from her bag. The same bag she'd carried all the way to his gate. Wyatt watched from the corner of his eye as he cleaned a length of tack. Her hand moved quick across the page. Not scratching, not guessing. Writing. Clean lines. Tight script. No hesitation. Faster than most men he'd known. He shifted in his chair. The floor creaked under his boot. Her hand stopped. Just for a second. Then the paper folded. Once, twice. Slipped back into the bag. She didn't look up. Wyatt didn't ask. Outside, somewhere down the road, a loose board banged in the wind. Then again. Then silence. He went back to his work, but he didn't stop noticing. Not the way she wrote, not the way she listened, not the way she'd known Crow was lying before the man had even finished speaking. Somewhere along the line, the valley had changed again. And this time, it wasn't just the wind. It was the feeling that something had already started moving. Something that wasn't going to stop. The cold came early that year. By mid-December, Red Hollow Valley had turned hard and white. The creek ran slow beneath a skin of ice, and every step across the yard carried a hollow crunch that echoed farther than it should. Breath showed in the air, thin and constant. Even the horses moved quieter, like they knew sound carried differently in winter. Wyatt woke before dawn most days. Habit. The kind that stuck whether a man needed it or not. That morning, it wasn't the cold that pulled him out of sleep. It was the smell, not wood smoke, not the clean kind that drifted steady from a stove. This was sharper, bitter, wrong. He was on his feet before the thought finished forming. Boots half-laced, coat thrown on without care. The door slammed open against the wind, and the cold hit him full in the chest. For a second, all he saw was white. Then the glow, low at first, flickering against the far side of the barn, then rising. "Damn it," he muttered, already moving. The snow took his steps and threw them back at him, boots slipping on the packed ice as he ran. The wind pushed the smoke low, thick and choking, and the fire caught along the dry boards like it had been waiting for the chance. He reached the pump and grabbed the handle, working it hard, fast. The metal burned cold through his gloves. "Wyatt!" Hannah's voice cut through the wind. He didn't turn. "Bucket!" he shouted. She was there before the word finished leaving him. Coat half-buttoned, hair loose, breath sharp in the air. She didn't ask what happened. Didn't hesitate. Just grabbed the bucket he shoved toward her and ran for the flames. Water hit wood. Steam rose thick and sudden. The fire didn't care. It climbed higher. Wyatt pumped harder, the rhythm turning rough, uneven. The handle groaned under the strain. "Again!" he called. Hannah was already moving back, empty bucket swinging at her side, boots slipping once before she caught herself on the frozen ground. She didn't slow. They fell into it without speaking. Pump, carry, throw, pump, carry, throw. The smoke pressed in, stinging eyes, catching in the throat. The heat pushed back against the cold, strange and wrong in the winter dark. A horse screamed inside the barn. Wyatt dropped the handle and ran. "Wyatt!" Hannah called. But he was already at the door, shoulder slamming against it. The wood gave enough to open a gap, heat rolling out in a wave that forced him back a step. He pulled his sleeve over his mouth and went in anyway. The horse was near the far stall, rope tangled, eyes wide and rolling. Wyatt moved fast, hands working at the knot, fingers clumsy from cold and heat both. The rope gave. The horse bolted past him, out into the yard, snow kicking up behind it. By the time Wyatt came back out, Hannah was already there with another bucket. She didn't look at him, just handed it over. They kept at it. The fire fought them the whole way, board by board, breath by breath. Time stretched. Or maybe it didn't move at all. At some point, the flames stopped climbing. At some point, they started to shrink. By the time the first gray of morning touched the sky, the east wall of the barn was blackened and broken, half the hay inside ruined, but the rest still standing. The fire had taken what it could. Then it had let go. Wyatt stood in the yard, chest heaving, hands hanging loose at his sides. The cold rushed back in where the heat had been, sharp and sudden. Hannah set the last empty bucket down. For a moment, neither of them moved. The wind came back, quiet, steady, like it had been waiting. Hannah took a step back and sat down in the snow without meaning to. Just folded where she stood. Her hands rested on her knees, fingers stiff and red, shaking just enough to notice. Wyatt walked over slow. He pulled off his coat and set it across her shoulders. Careful, not touching her skin, just the weight of it, settling. She didn't look up, didn't thank him. Her breath came in short, controlled pulls, like she was keeping something inside from spilling out. For a long second, there was only the sound of the wind moving past them and the faint crackle of what little fire remained. Then she spoke. "He won't stop." Wyatt's jaw tightened. He didn't ask who, didn't need to. He looked back at the barn, at the way the burn had started low, near the base. Too clean, too even, not an accident. He crouched near the edge of the blackened wall, brushing snow aside with his glove. The smell was there. Oil. Faint, but enough. He straightened slowly and turned back to her. Hannah was watching him now, no fear in her eyes, just certainty. "You know it was him," Wyatt said. She nodded once. The wind lifted the edge of his coat where it rested on her shoulders. For a moment, neither of them spoke again. Then Wyatt said, quiet and steady, "We'll handle it." Hannah held his gaze. And this time, when she nodded, it wasn't as a guest. It wasn't as someone passing through. It was as someone who had already decided she wasn't leaving. Not now. Not after this. Morning came slow, gray light settling over the burned edge of the barn like it didn't want to touch it. The air still carried the faint sting of smoke. Snow had drifted against the blackened boards, covering what it could, leaving the rest plain to see. Wyatt was already outside, working without thinking, hammer in hand, nails between his teeth. Fix what could be fixed. That was the rule. Hannah stepped out of the cabin a little later, his coat still around her shoulders. She didn't say anything, just stood there a moment, looking at the damage, the way a person studies something that almost took more than it should have. Then she went back inside. Wyatt noticed, didn't follow, didn't ask. A few minutes passed, maybe more. When she came back out, she wasn't empty-handed. The bag she'd carried the day she arrived was open now, papers in her hands, folded, worn at the edges, but kept clean. She walked to the table on the porch like she'd already decided where this was going. "Come here," she said. Wyatt set the hammer down. Something in her voice didn't leave room for delay. He stepped up onto the porch, wiping his hands on his coat, and stood across from her. She spread the papers out flat. Not random pages. Records. Land boundaries. Water rights. Signatures. Dates. The kind of documents most folks didn't know how to read, let alone understand. Wyatt leaned in. Her finger moved across one line, then another. "He filed this claim 2 years ago," she said. "Says the water runs through his land first." Wyatt frowned. "It doesn't." "I know." Her finger tapped once. "But this line here—" She paused just long enough for him to follow. "That's been altered." The ink was darker, slightly thicker. Not something a man would notice unless he knew to look. Wyatt's jaw tightened. "You're sure?" Hannah looked at him then. Not defensive. Not uncertain. Just steady. "I don't guess when it comes to paper." That sat there. The wind moved across the porch, lifting the edges of the documents. Wyatt looked back down. "You been carrying this with you the whole time?" She nodded once. "He's done this before," she said. "Different places. Same trick." Wyatt straightened slowly. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" Hannah folded one of the papers back, careful, precise. "You didn't ask." He let out a breath through his nose. "Fair enough." A sound came from the road. Hoofbeats this time. Not polished wheels, not quiet, just a horse ridden hard enough to matter. They both turned. Sheriff Boone rode up without ceremony, coat half-buttoned, hat pulled low against the wind. He slowed at the gate, took one look at the barn, and swung down before the horse had fully stopped. "Heard about the fire," he said, voice rough with the cold. Wyatt nodded toward the blackened wall. "Started low. Oil." Boone's eyes moved over it, sharp despite the way he carried himself. "That's so." Hannah stepped forward, the papers still in her hand. "There's more," she said. The sheriff looked at her. Really looked. Then at Wyatt. Wyatt didn't say anything, just gave a small nod. That was enough. Boone walked up onto the porch. Hannah handed him the papers. He took them slow, like he wasn't expecting much. Then his brow pulled in, just slightly, as he read. "You write this?" he asked. "I did." He read another line. "And you're certain?" "Yes." Boone folded the papers once, then again. "Stay put," he said. "I'll be back." He didn't waste time mounting up. The horse turned hard and took the road back toward town, hooves striking sharp against the frozen ground. The sound faded. The valley went quiet again. Wyatt looked at Hannah. "You knew," he said. She met his eyes. "I knew enough." He nodded once. No more questions. Not about where she learned it. Not about why she'd come. The rest of the day passed slow. Work done where it could be. Silence where it couldn't. By evening, the light had turned gold against the snow, the kind that didn't last long. Hannah stood by the fence, pulling a length of wire tight with both hands. The movement wasn't smooth yet, but it was getting there. Wyatt walked up beside her, took the other end without a word, and held it steady while she worked. For a moment, their hands came close. Not touching, just close enough to notice. The wire snapped into place. She let go first. He didn't move right away. "You don't have to stay," he said. The words came out plain. No weight added. Hannah didn't look at him. She reached for the next length of wire, set it against the post, and pulled it through. "I know." She twisted it tight, slower this time. Careful. The wind moved past them, lighter now. Somewhere in the distance, a horse called out, answered by another. Wyatt watched her for a second longer, then picked up his tools and went back to work beside her. Not ahead, not behind, just there. And for the first time since she'd walked through his gate, the place didn't feel like something he was holding together alone. It felt like something that might last. If you stood there long enough, you'd notice it wasn't the land that changed. Not the fence, not the barn, not even the wind that kept moving through Red Hollow the same as it always had. It was the quiet between two people who stopped bracing for loss and started building something anyway. Now imagine it for a moment. Being that far out, where no one comes looking for you, where the past follows close and the future feels thin as winter light. And then someone shows up, not to be saved, not to take, but to stand beside you and say, without saying it, "We'll hold this ground together." That kind of love doesn't arrive loud. It shows up in small things. A coat placed without touch, a wire pulled tight side by side. A choice to stay when leaving would have been easier. Maybe that's the truth most folks miss. It's not about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone who stays and choosing to stay back. If this story left something with you, tell me where you're watching from. I'd like to know how far these roads reach. And if you've got a place by the fire for stories like this, stories about grit, quiet strength, and the kind of love that's built, not found, then you're welcome to ride along. There are more waiting just ahead.